Hello, and welcome back to SnooZen. Find your most comfortable spot, and allow the weight of the day to gently release its hold. Dim the lights, and let your thoughts soften. Let your breathing find its own, slow and easy rhythm. Tonight, we have a collection of stories about quiet justice. These are not stories of loud confrontations or angry revenge. They are tales of patience, of elegance, of a quiet and methodical and inevitable balancing of the scales. Stories where the truth is revealed not in a shout, but in a soft and simple and undeniable whisper. If these peaceful journeys bring you a sense of calm, I would be so very grateful if you would consider subscribing. It helps our quiet community grow and ensures you will always have a peaceful place to rest. But for now, just settle in, take a slow deep breath in and out, and let's begin. Before Alan, the office had a quiet and gentle rhythm. The mornings were the best, washed in the soft grey light that slanted through the tall windows. The only sounds were the sounds of work, the soft rhythmic clicking of keyboards, a sound like gentle rain, the low steady hum of the computers, a quiet digital breath, and the gentle occasional rustle of paper, a sound as soft as a turning page in an empty library. It was a peaceful sound, a productive sound, but Alan brought a different kind of sound. You would hear him before you saw him. His footsteps were always loud and brisk, a sharp, confident tapping on the polished floor that cut through the office's quiet hum. He wore a cologne that was sharp and artificial, a scent that always seemed to announce his arrival a moment before he appeared. And his voice was always just a little too loud for the quiet space, as if he were trying to fill every corner of the room with his presence. On a Monday morning, a morning that had started with its usual peaceful rhythm, he called a mandatory meeting. We all filed into the main conference room. The air in that room was always different. It was colder, and it held the stale, recycled scent of the building's air conditioning. The leather chairs were cool and smooth, and they made a soft, sighing sound as you settled into them. Alan stood at the head of the long, polished table, a confident smile on his face. "Team," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the still, quiet room. "We are going to be synergizing our workflows." He spoke for a few minutes, using a language of corporate jargon that was meant to sound important, but said very little. He spoke of data-driven accountability and optimizing our deliverables, and then he announced the real reason for the meeting, a new software called OmniTrack. It was, he explained, a productivity tool, a way to ensure that we were all working at our peak potential. He said it would monitor every click, every email, every minute of our activity to provide us with valuable feedback. He called it a digital mentor, but we all knew what it really was. The meeting ended, and we all filed back out into the quiet of the office. We returned to our desks in a new kind of silence, a heavier silence. The soft, productive hum of the morning was gone, and in its place was the quiet, invisible, and constant weight of being watched. And so, the quiet hum of the office was replaced by the silent, watchful eye of the data stream. The quiet of the office had a new sound now. It was not a human sound. It was not the gentle rustle of paper or the soft click of a keyboard. It was a soft electronic ping that would echo in the still air every time a task was logged. A quiet digital heartbeat, measuring our every move. And there was a new light, a small glowing green eye that sat at the top of every monitor. It was the light of productive engagement, Alan had called it. It was always there, a quiet, constant witness, a silent green star in the dim afternoon light of the office. This new, supervised world was a difficult place for thought. My work, my real work, requires moments of stillness, moments to just lean back and look out the window at the slow drifting clouds, moments to let an idea find its shape in the quiet of my own mind. But the software, the little green eye, saw these moments as idleness, as inefficiency, and so the quiet creative spaces in my day began to shrink. The gentle rhythm of my work was replaced by the steady, anxious pressure to always be clicking, to always be engaged, so I stayed late one evening. I waited until the last of my colleagues had gone home, their soft goodbyes echoing in the emptying halls. I watched from my window as the sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the clouds in soft shades of orange and purple. The office grew dark and deeply, peacefully quiet. The only sound now was the gentle, steady hum of the servers from the room down the hall, a low and constant and calming thrum. The only light was the soft, cool glow of my monitor and the distant, twinkling lights of the city outside. In the stillness of that empty, sleeping office, I opened the OmniTrack administrative dashboard for the very first time. The screen filled with a cool blue light. It was a world of neat graphs and silent flowing data streams. It was clean and minimalist, and in its own mathematical way, strangely beautiful. Every click, every keystroke, every second of our day transformed into elegant, flowing lines of pure information. I felt no anger as I looked at this new secret world. No sense of rebellion, only a calm and quiet, analytical curiosity. I am a data analyst after all, and this was the most interesting data set I had ever seen. I wanted to understand the shape of our new digital world, and in the quiet of that empty office, I began to look for the patterns in the data. I began with my own team, with a few soft clicks. I ran the reports. On the screen, a beautiful, elegant pattern appeared. Long, clean, unbroken blocks of deep blue, representing hours of focused, productive work. Deep work, the system called it. Here and there were small, thin lines of grey for meetings or emails, but the overall picture was one of calm and steady and efficient effort. It was the data shape of a team that worked well. Then, out of a quiet, professional curiosity, I ran a report on Alan. The image that appeared on the screen was startlingly different. It was not a calm blue ocean of focused work. It was a chaotic mess, a frantic, fractured storm of tiny, colourful slivers. There were no long blue blocks of deep work, not a single one. His entire day was a scattered, fragmented collection of short, disjointed tasks. It was the visual representation of noise. I leaned closer to the screen, the cool blue light illuminating my face in the dark, silent office. My fingers moved across the keyboard, the gentle, rhythmic clicking the only sound. I began to drill down into the details, and the story the data told was profound and deeply ironic. Alan's entire day was built of what I could only call meta work. He was not producing anything. He was simply producing the appearance of work. He would spend an hour sending a flurry of emails about an upcoming meeting. Then he would spend another hour in a meeting to plan for the meeting he had just sent emails about. The data showed him then creating a new document, a document that was a summary of the meeting he had just held. To plan for the future meeting, it was a perfect and beautiful and completely closed loop of pure and absolute inefficiency. I sat back in my chair, the soft leather sighing beneath me. I felt no anger, no sense of triumph. What I felt was a quiet, almost sad sense of discovery. The data did not lie. It had no agenda, no emotion. It simply showed what was true. And what was true was that the man who had brought this system of oppressive constant measurement upon us was, by the system's own elegant mathematical logic, the least productive person in the entire office. I had found the beautiful, clear, and fatal shape of his own inefficiency. And as Alan, in his arrogance, prepared for a company-wide review, I knew that this quiet mathematical truth would soon have a story to tell. The opportunity arrived in an email. It appeared on a Tuesday morning with a soft, polite ding that rippled through the quiet office. I watched as everyone on my team paused their work and opened the message. The text glowed with a soft white light on my screen. It was a company-wide announcement from the vice presidents, a formal efficiency review. They were looking to identify and reward top performers based on the new, rich data we were all generating. A few minutes later, another email arrived from Alan. Mandatory team meeting. Conference room B, 10 minutes. The air in the conference room was, as always, cool and still. The sharp, artificial scent of Alan's cologne seemed to hang in the air, a clean and sterile and confident smell. He stood at the head of the polished table, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. He held a printout of the VP's email in his hand. "Team," he began, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "This is the perfect opportunity." He spoke with great excitement about the review. He saw it not as a threat, but as a validation, a chance to prove that his system, his OmniTrack software, was a brilliant success. "The data," he said, his smile widening, "will speak for itself. It will clearly identify the key drivers of our success. And of course," he paused for effect, "the underperformers who need to be held accountable." He looked around the room as if expecting applause, but the room remained silent. "I," he announced, his voice full of a grand theatrical confidence, "will be personally creating and delivering the presentation to the VPs. I will showcase what true, data-driven productivity looks like." I sat in my cool leather chair, and I felt a quiet and calm and profound sense of fate clicking into place. I knew that he would ask me, the quiet, methodical data analyst, to pull the reports for his presentation, and I knew that the data was waiting patiently on the humming servers down the hall, ready to tell its quiet and elegant and perfectly honest story. All I had to do was create the chart. The request arrived, as I knew it would. An email from Alan, asking me to prepare the data slides for the VPs. I spent the afternoon working in the quiet of my own desk. The process was a calm and methodical meditation. I pulled the data from the humming servers, and I began to give it shape. I chose a simple, professional color palette, soft, gentle grays, and cool, calming blues. The lines of my charts were clean and thin. The labels were written in a simple, elegant font. There was nothing loud, nothing alarming. The slides were designed to be, perfectly and quietly, honest. The executive conference room was a world of deep and profound silence. It was a room on the highest floor of the building, far above the gentle hum of the city below. The carpet was a deep, soft grey, and it muffled the sound of every footstep, every quiet cough. The long mahogany table was polished to a dark, liquid shine, and the air was still and cool and smelled faintly of leather and wood. The vice presidents were already there, sitting in the tall-backed chairs, their attention calm and focused. Alan began his presentation. He moved confidently through the first few slides, his voice the only sound in the deeply silent room. He showcased the high productivity of the marketing team, a tall, healthy bar of deep, calm blue. He praised the efficiency of the design department, another elegant, impressive bar of soft grey blue. He was telling a good story, a story of success, a story he believed was his. And then I advanced to the final slide. It appeared on the large white screen with a soft, silent click. It was a simple and elegant bar chart. The title was clear and professional and quietly devastating. Ratio of productive work versus administrative overhead. On the screen, every team in the company had a tall, healthy blue bar, showing long hours of deep, focused, productive work. And then there was Alan's bar. It was a tiny, barely visible sliver of blue, a sliver so small you almost had to squint to see it. It was a quiet, mathematical whisper. In a room full of loud, confident data, a long and heavy and profound silence settled over the room. It was a silence so deep that I could hear the gentle, steady hum of the projector fan, a sound like a single, held breath. I watched the vice presidents. They did not speak. They did not look at Alan. They simply, slowly and silently, leaned forward in their chairs. Their eyes were fixed on the screen. And in that deep and heavy and perfect quiet, the undeniable truth of the data, gently and completely, settled in. And in that quiet, a new day for the office was about to dawn. A morning that would feel much, much lighter. The next morning, the office felt different. The air itself felt lighter. The usual quiet felt less like a heavy blanket and more like a soft and gentle and comfortable silence. As I walked down the main hallway, I passed Alan's old office, and I noticed that it was empty. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, the large, dark desk was cleared of all its papers. The shelves were bare. It was just a simple, quiet, empty room. And the small silver nameplate on the door, the one that read Alan Reed, Director of Synergy, had been quietly removed. Later that morning, another company-wide memo appeared in our inboxes. A soft, polite ding. It announced a restructuring. The mandatory use of the OmniTrack software was being scaled back. It was now a simple and optional time-logging tool, and one by one, all around the office, the small, glowing green lights on the tops of our monitors went out. The watchful, digital eyes were finally closed. The atmosphere in the office began to change. The heavy, anxious tension that had settled over us for weeks began to lift. I could hear the soft, comfortable murmur of genuine collaboration. Returning to the quiet corners of the room, the soft rustle of paper, the gentle clicking of keyboards, it all sounded different now. It sounded peaceful again. The office was returning to its natural and gentle and productive rhythm. I sat at my desk in the soft grey light of the late afternoon. I was holding a warm ceramic mug of coffee, the gentle, earthy steam rising in a slow, lazy spiral. I felt no sense of triumphant victory, no satisfying sharp sting of revenge. What I felt was a profound and deep and satisfying sense of balance, a quiet and correct and peaceful order that had been gently and finally restored. And as a quiet mathematical order is restored, let us drift from the cold, sterile world of the office to a conflict of a more natural kind. My favorite time of day is the early morning, before the world outside wakes up, before the sound of cars and voices fills the air. There is a deep and peaceful stillness, and in that stillness, my garden is the most alive. I like to walk there in the soft grey light of dawn. The air is cool and smells of sweet, damp earth, and of the soft, gentle perfume of the blooming lavender. The grass is wet with a cool silver dew, and I can feel the tiny, perfect drops of water on the broad green leaves of the milkweed plants. The only sound is the low and gentle and steady hum of the bees as they begin their slow and patient work among the wildflowers. My garden is a place of quiet and gentle chaos. It is not a neat and tidy and orderly place. There are no perfect lines, no sterile landscapes. It is a messy and beautiful and living thing. I designed it to be a sanctuary, a safe and quiet haven for the bees and the butterflies and all the other small creatures who are so often forgotten. It is my quiet rebellion. My neighbor to the left is Carol. She is the president of our homeowners association. I see her sometimes in the mornings, a still and silent figure behind her perfectly clean, gleaming windows. She has a rigid posture and always wears clothes of crisp, white linen. She never waves, she just watches, and I can feel her quiet and constant judgment. Her lawn is the opposite of my garden. It is a perfect and flawless and completely unnatural carpet of the deepest emerald green. There is not a single weed, not a single brown patch, not a single dandelion. It seems to hum with a strange, artificial energy. It is a lawn that is not allowed to breathe, a lawn that is not allowed to be a living thing. And every morning and every evening, I hear the soft, rhythmic hiss of her automatic sprinklers, keeping her perfect green world unnaturally and constantly damp. But I did not know then that her quiet, sterile world was about to send a cold, white messenger to my own. The conflict began, not with a loud argument, but with the soft, quiet rustle of paper. It was a warm afternoon. The sun was slanting low in the sky, casting long, gentle shadows across my lawn. I was performing the simple, calming ritual of checking the mail. I remember the feeling of the black metal mailbox, warm from the afternoon sun. I remember the soft, pleasant shuffle of the envelopes in my hand as I walked back up the driveway, and among the usual collection of bills and advertisements was a single, crisp, white envelope. It stood out from the rest. The paper was thick and heavy, and it felt strangely cold in my warm hands. In the top corner was the formal embossed logo of the Homeowners Association. A perfect, sterile little picture of a perfect, sterile little house. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper was folded into perfect thirds. The words on the page were not a friendly note. They were cold and sterile and impersonal, a language of rules and violations. My mind read the words, and they felt like a foreign language. The letter spoke of unmanaged flora and of aesthetic non-compliance. It mentioned my garden, my beautiful, living, breathing garden, and it called it a disorderly visual nuisance. There was no signature, no personal note, just the cold typed authority of the HOA, demanding that I correct the violations. Within 30 days I felt a slow and heavy sinking feeling. It was not a hot, fiery anger. It was a deep and quiet and cold frustration, a feeling of profound and weary injustice. I lowered the letter and I looked out my window. I looked from the cold white piece of paper in my hand to my vibrant living garden outside. The bees were still humming their slow and patient song among the purple flowers. A bright orange butterfly was resting gently on a milkweed leaf. My garden was a place of life, of peace, of gentle, natural chaos. And the cold, sterile letter in my hand wanted to kill it. The contrast felt profoundly and deeply and quietly unfair. And in that quiet frustration, I knew I could not fight this battle with anger, but would need to seek a different, quieter kind of answer in the dust of old records. My first instinct was to walk next door, to hold the cold white letter in my hand and confront Carol. But I knew it would be a fruitless conversation. Her mind was a perfectly manicured lawn. There was no room for wildflowers to grow there. So I chose a different path. A quiet resolve settled over me, a calm and steady determination. If she was going to fight me with rules, then I would need to understand the rules better than she did. That evening, I sat at my desk in the deep, peaceful quiet of my house. The only light came from the soft, cool glow of my computer monitor. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic clicking of my mouse. As I navigated the HOA's poorly organized website, I scrolled through pages of bylaws and amendments and meeting minutes. The text glowed softly in the dark, still room, a river of words that held somewhere the answer I was looking for. The next day, my search took me to the town hall. The public records room was a place of deep and profound and beautiful quiet. It had high, dusty ceilings, and the air was still and cool, and it carried the most comforting, musty smell of old paper and aging leather and bookbinder's glue. It was the scent of 1,000 forgotten stories, all resting peacefully on the tall wooden shelves. The silence in that room was a heavy and gentle and welcoming thing. I found the section for city ordinances. The books were enormous and heavy, bound in dark, cracked leather. I pulled one from the shelf and carried it to a long wooden table. The pages inside were yellowed with age, and they felt as soft and as fragile as dried leaves. I was not searching in anger. My frustration had settled into a calm and focused curiosity. I was a quiet detective, searching for a single forgotten clue in a dusty, silent library of rules. And as my fingers traced the old, typewritten lines, I felt a sense of peace. I knew the answer was here, sleeping, waiting, and in that quiet, dusty room, I would find the whisper of a forgotten law. I turned the soft, fragile pages, one by one. The air in the records room was still and cool and silent, and then I found it. It was tucked away in a section of the city code from the late 1970s. The ink on this page was different, a faded, gentle blue, not the harsh, modern black of the other pages. It was from a time when the world moved a little slower. My finger traced the old, typewritten words, and I read. The ordinance had been enacted during a severe drought, a dry, dusty summer long ago when the town's reservoirs had run low. It was a law born of necessity, of a shared communal need to conserve, and it strictly limited residential water use for non-essential, aesthetic purposes. The words seemed to hum with a quiet, forgotten power. And then I read the next line, the line that made the entire silent room feel like it was holding its breath with me. The law specifically mentioned the maintenance of purely ornamental lawns. It was still there, a quiet sleeping law that had never been repealed. It had only been forgotten, tucked away in the dusty pages of an old heavy book, waiting for someone to remember it. I sat back in the heavy wooden chair, a slow and deeply satisfying sense of things clicking into place washed over me. It was not a feeling of anger or of vengeance. It was the quiet, peaceful feeling of discovering a beautiful old truth, a piece of forgotten wisdom. The solution was not to fight Carol's cold, sterile rules with more rules of my own. The solution was to apply a much older and much wiser rule to her. And in the quiet of that afternoon, I knew the sound of sprinklers in the morning was about to change. The next morning, I made a phone call. I sat in my quiet kitchen with a warm mug of tea in my hands. The morning sun slanted through the window, casting soft golden light on the wooden table. I called the city's water department. My voice was a low and calm and polite murmur. I did not give my name. I simply and anonymously reported a potential violation of a long-forgotten ordinance, and I gave them Carol's address. A few days passed. The world continued in its slow and gentle and peaceful rhythm. The bees continued their patient work in my garden. The sun continued to rise and to set. Carol's sprinklers continued their soft, rhythmic hissing every morning and every evening. And then, on a Thursday morning, as I was sitting on my back porch sipping my coffee and watching the butterflies, a quiet and official-looking city vehicle pulled up to the curb in front of Carol's house. It was a simple white car with the city's crest on the door. It made almost no sound as it stopped. The car door opened and then closed. With a soft and solid and final-sounding thud, a man in a simple khaki uniform, holding a clipboard, walked up Carol's perfect stone pathway. I watched from my window. It was not a dramatic confrontation. There was no shouting. There were no angry gestures. It was just a quiet and polite and professional conversation. The man in the khaki uniform would speak, and then Carol would speak. He would point to his clipboard, and then he would hand her a single, crisp piece of paper. And then came the climax. It was not a loud noise. It was not a sudden crash. It was the sudden and abrupt and total absence of a sound, the soft hissing rhythm of Carol's automatic sprinkler system, which had been running, as it always did, in the background of our quiet morning, suddenly stopped, mid-cycle. The quiet that followed was profound and deeply and peacefully satisfying. And in that quiet, I knew the green of her lawn and the green of my garden were about to find a new, more natural balance. In the quiet weeks that followed, a slow and gentle and natural change began to take place. The sound of Carol's twice-daily sprinklers was gone. The soft, rhythmic hiss that had been a constant artificial presence in our quiet neighborhood was replaced by a different, more natural sound. The low and gentle and steady hum of happy insects, the soft, peaceful chirp of crickets in the evening, and Carol's lawn began to breathe. Her perfect emerald green carpet, the one that had seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, slowly began to soften. It faded to a more natural and gentle and muted shade of yellow-green. A few brave yellow dandelions appeared near the sidewalk. It was no longer a perfect, sterile thing. It was becoming a living lawn again. A week later, another crisp, white envelope appeared in my mailbox. It had the same formal embossed logo of the HOA, but this letter was different. It was a quiet and formal notice. It stated, in the same cold and impersonal language as before, that the complaint against my property had been withdrawn. There was no apology. No explanation, just a quiet and complete and final surrender. My own garden seemed to feel the change in the air. It was thriving more than ever before. It was a beautiful, gentle riot of purples and yellows and blues, a quiet and messy and perfect celebration of life now in the evenings. I like to sit on my back porch. I hold a warm mug of tea in my hands, and I listen to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood settling down for the night. I hear the gentle, peaceful sound of crickets, Instead of the hiss of sprinklers, I watch the fireflies, blinking their soft golden lights in the tall grasses of my garden. I feel no sense of victory, no feeling of triumphant revenge. What I feel is a sense of peaceful and natural balance. My garden's messiness was a sign of life, and in the end, life, in its quiet and gentle and persistent way, had won. As a natural balance returns to the neighborhood, let us settle into a story about letting nature and a lack of caffeine take its quiet, inevitable course. My mornings are a quiet and sacred ritual. Before the sun is fully awake, in the soft grey light of dawn, I make my way to the kitchen. The old wooden floorboards are cool and smooth. Beneath my bare feet, the only sound is the soft, gentle hiss of the water beginning to heat in the kettle. I love this time of day. The world outside is still sleeping, and the apartment is a small and peaceful and quiet island. My coffee is the center of this ritual. It is a small and simple luxury, an expensive dark roast from a small shop downtown. I love the rich, earthy smell of the beans as I pour them into the grinder, a dark and chocolatey and comforting scent. And I love the satisfying heavy weight of my favorite ceramic mug in my hands, its surface smooth and cool and familiar. My roommate Liam has a very different morning ritual. His begins with the loud, jarring sound of his third alarm. It is a sound that cuts through the quiet peace of the apartment. His energy is a whirlwind, a chaotic storm of hurried movements and loud, clumsy sounds. The slam of his bedroom door, the frantic rustle of papers as he searches for a forgotten assignment, a general aura of last-minute self-inflicted panic. And lately, I have noticed something is amiss. In my own quiet morning world, a few days ago, as I picked up my bag of expensive coffee beans, it felt just a little lighter than it should have. And when I looked into the grinder, the level of the dark, fragrant beans was just a little lower than I had left it the morning before. It was a small thing, a quiet observation, not yet an accusation, but I began to notice other small things as well. My good headphones, not on the hook where I always leave them, but on the living room table, a dirty bowl left in the sink, a bowl I knew was not mine. It was a pattern of small and casual and thoughtless disrespect, a quiet, steady blurring of the lines between what was his and what was mine. And in the quiet of my morning ritual, a small and gentle and weary suspicion began to take root. The suspicion was a quiet, unwelcome guest in my peaceful morning world. So, I decided to invite a quiet and simple truth to join it. I began a small and silent experiment. In our kitchen, tucked away in a drawer beneath the silverware, was a small digital kitchen scale. I used it for baking. This morning, I used it for something else. In the soft grey light of the dawn, I placed my bag of expensive coffee beans on the cool glass surface of the scale. A number, glowing with a soft red light, appeared on the small screen. I made a quiet, mental note of it. And then, I went about my day. When I returned that evening, the apartment was quiet. Liam was at the library, studying for his final exams. The air was still, and the setting sun cast long, warm, orange shadows across the clean kitchen floor. I took the bag of coffee beans from the cupboard, and I placed it once again on the small glass scale. A new number glowed with the same soft red light, and it was, as I had suspected, smaller, not by much, but by a precise and undeniable amount. My suspicion was now a quiet and simple and mathematical fact. I felt no rage, no hot, fiery anger, only a quiet and weary and heavy sense of disappointment. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the cost of the coffee. It was about the small and simple and unspoken trust between two people who share a quiet space, a trust that had been casually and thoughtlessly broken later that night. I heard Liam on the phone in his room. His voice was not a whisper. It was loud and confident and full of a casual, youthful arrogance. He was talking to a friend about his upcoming exams. "I'm not worried, man," he said, his voice muffled slightly by the wall between us. "I'm totally supercharged. I've got access to this amazing coffee. It's like rocket fuel. I can study all night." He was not just stealing my coffee. He was proud of it. He saw it not as a violation, but as a resource, my resource. And in the quiet of my own room, I decided that his access to my rocket fuel was about to come to a very, very quiet and gentle end. Finals week descended upon our apartment building like a soft, heavy blanket of quiet concentration. The usual sounds of loud music and late-night conversations faded away. They were replaced by a new kind of sound, the low and muffled and steady tap-tap-tapping of keyboards through the thin walls, the soft rustle of turning pages. And when I looked out my window at night, I could see the small glowing squares of light in other windows. Students bent over their desks, studying deep into the quiet hours. The time was right. I went to the specialty grocery store on a calm, rainy afternoon. The rain was a gentle, steady drizzle, and it made the inside of the store feel even more warm and cozy. The air inside was peaceful. It smelled of freshly baked bread, of the warm, toasty scent of roasting nuts, and of the clean, sweet fragrance of fresh produce. A soft and gentle and wordless ambient music drifted from hidden speakers, a sound as soft as the rain outside. My journey was a quiet and purposeful meditation. I purchased 2 bags of coffee. The first was my usual, the expensive dark roast beans. With their rich and chocolatey and powerful aroma, my rocket fuel, the second bag, looked identical. The same elegant minimalist packaging, the same artisanal branding. But these beans held a quiet secret. They were a high-quality Swiss water process decaf. Beans that had been gently and carefully stripped of all their power. Beans that smelled wonderful, but offered nothing. A beautiful and flavorless and completely useless deception. That evening, in the deep and peaceful quiet of our kitchen, I performed the ritual. I opened my expensive branded coffee bag, the one Liam had come to rely on, and I opened the bag of the beautiful, powerless decaf. And with a slow and steady and careful hand, I poured the useless beans into my bag. The only sound in the quiet kitchen was the soft and dry and gentle rattling of the beans as they filled the bag to the top. It was a satisfying sound, the sound of a quiet and harmless and perfectly natural trap being set. And with the trap now in place, all that was left to do was to observe the gentle, inevitable, and entirely natural placebo effect. The next morning, the experiment began. I was sitting at the quiet kitchen table, reading a book, when Liam emerged from his room, a whirlwind of anxious energy, as always. He went straight for the coffee. I watched him, over the top of my book. He opened the bag, my bag, and he took a deep, dramatic sniff of the beans inside. Ah, he sighed, a sound of profound satisfaction. The good stuff. I am going to need so much of this to survive the day. He ground the beans. The whirring of the machine, a loud, angry sound in the quiet morning. He brewed a large, steaming mug of the dark, useless liquid. He held the warm mug in both hands, closed his eyes, and inhaled the steam as if it were a life-giving elixir. And I felt a quiet and calm, and almost clinical, sense of observation. I was not gloating. I was not angry. I was simply watching a small and harmless and natural scientific process unfold. The placebo effect was a powerful thing, but it does not last forever. In the days that followed, I began to notice the small and subtle signs. Liam was still drinking the coffee, great, enormous mugs of it, but he seemed more tired. His usual chaotic energy was replaced by a slow and sluggish and irritable fog. He would complain of a dull, persistent headache that sat just behind his eyes. He would complain of his inability to focus, of reading the same page of his textbook over and over, without the words making any sense. He blamed it on the stress of his exams. He blamed it on a lack of sleep. He never once suspected the coffee, and every morning, my own quiet, sacred ritual continued. But now, there was a new element. After Liam had left for his classes, I would go to my own room, and from a small hidden corner of my closet, I would take out my real coffee, the true rocket fuel. And as I sat, enjoying the rich and complex and genuinely powerful flavor, I would allow myself a small and quiet and secret smile, and I would wait. for the slow and gentle and inevitable crumbling to begin. The climax arrived not with a bang, but with a soft and gentle and deeply tired thud. It was the night before Liam's most important final exam, his most difficult subject. I was in my own room, reading a novel in the warm, quiet glow of my bedside lamp, and I could hear him in the room next to mine. I could hear the soft and weary and anxious creaking of the old floorboards as he paced back and forth and back again, a restless, caged energy. And throughout the long, quiet hours of the night, I would hear the familiar, angry whirring of the coffee grinder from the kitchen, followed by the soft, hopeful gurgle of the coffee maker. He was making another pot, and then another, fueling his desperate late-night studying with a beautiful and fragrant and completely powerless lie. The next morning, he was a mess. I saw him when I went to the kitchen for my own real morning coffee, and I felt a quiet and gentle and almost sympathetic pity for him. His eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, and they had the unfocused, hazy look of someone who has not truly slept at all. His movements were slow and heavy and sluggish, as if he were wading through deep, invisible water. He tried to pour a bowl of cereal, and a slow white river of milk spilled across the dark wooden counter. He did not even seem to notice. He made one last desperate attempt. He brewed a final enormous mug of the dark, useless decaf, and as he stood, waiting for it to cool, he muttered to himself, his voice a low and gravelly and deeply confused whisper, "I feel strangely immune to caffeine this week." He took the mug and his heavy textbook, and he sat down at the kitchen table. I returned to my own room. With my own powerful, fragrant, real coffee, I sat in my comfortable chair, and I continued to read my book. The apartment was quiet. The world was peaceful. And then, from the kitchen, I heard a new sound. It was not a loud or dramatic or angry sound. It was the soft and gentle and pathetic thud of a human head hitting a heavy textbook as Liam finally and completely and inevitably fell fast asleep. Right in the middle of his last desperate sentence, and with that final gentle thud, a quiet unspoken understanding was about to begin. After the quiet storm of finals week had passed, a deep and peaceful and exhausted calm settled over our apartment. One afternoon, while Liam was out, I performed one last quiet ritual. I took the bag of beautiful, useless decaf, and I poured the beans into a simple, unmarked jar for myself. And then, I refilled my own expensive branded coffee bag with my own expensive branded coffee beans, the real rocket fuel. A few days later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a book in the warm, quiet light of the late morning. Liam, looking rested and recovered for the first time in weeks, decided to make a cup of coffee. I watched him over the top of my book. I watched him go through the familiar motions, grinding the beans, brewing the coffee, pouring the dark, fragrant liquid into his favorite mug. And then I watched him take the first sip. He paused, a slow and quiet and dawning look of profound realization spread across his face. He looked down at the mug in his hands, as if it were a strange and magical object. He took another slower sip, and in his eyes, I could see the moment the real flavor, the real warmth, the real and powerful and unmistakable caffeine finally hit him. He looked from the mug in his hands to the expensive branded bag of coffee sitting on the counter, and then, for the very first time in a long, long time, he looked directly at me. Our eyes met. Across the quiet, sunlit kitchen, no words were spoken, none were needed, but in that long and deep and perfectly silent moment, everything was understood. That afternoon, Liam went to the grocery store, and he returned with his own bag of coffee, a much cheaper brand, a simple and honest and completely unremarkable bag of coffee. He placed it quietly on the counter next to mine, and the quiet and correct and natural order of our kitchen had been peacefully and finally restored, and with that quiet, wordless understanding settled. Let us turn to a story where the truth is hidden not in a coffee cup, but in the silent digital ghost of a beautiful image, our friendship. was born in the quiet hours of the night, in a small shared studio apartment, a space that always smelled faintly of coffee and old books. We were both digital artists, and our favorite time to work was after the city outside had grown quiet, after the world had gone to sleep. The only light in the room would be the soft, cool glow of our computer monitors, casting long, gentle shadows on the walls. The only sounds were the quiet, steady hum of our computers, a sound like a sleeping cat, and the soft, rhythmic scratching of our digital styluses on the smooth, dark surfaces of our tablets. It was a peaceful sound, a sound of creation. My art was quiet, thoughtful. I loved creating complex, delicate textures, soft, muted color palettes. Chloe's art was different. It was bold and bright and commercial. It was designed to catch the eye, to make a statement. I always thought of our styles as complementary, two different languages, telling the same story. I never saw her as competition. Our shared dream had a name, Aperture, a design studio downtown. Their work was legendary, clean, and minimalist, and intelligent. We would look at their website for hours, a quiet reverence for the beautiful, simple things they made. To work there felt less like a job and more like a calling. We worked on our portfolios together. Late into the night, Chloe would often admire my background textures, the intricate, lace-like patterns I would spend days creating. "I could never do that," she would say, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet room. "I don't have the patience," feeling generous and a little insecure. I told her she could borrow them. I sent her the files, a small act of friendship, a quiet offering of support. I saw it as a natural part of our collaboration, our shared dream. I did not know then that for her, it was not a collaboration, it was an audition. And as the rejection letter arrived on a quiet, rainy afternoon, I would soon learn the sound of a stolen future. The email arrived on a Tuesday. It was a quiet, rainy afternoon. The sky outside was a soft, uniform grey, and the rain made a gentle, rhythmic pattering sound against the window pane, a peaceful, hypnotic sound. I saw the subject line in my inbox, an update from Aperture Studios. My heart did not race. It was a calm and quiet and hopeful moment. I opened the email and I read the words, the polite and professional and deeply cold corporate text. "While we were impressed with your portfolio, the applicant pool was exceptionally strong." The rest of the words were a blur. The only sound in the room was the soft, steady drumming of the rain. I felt a deep and quiet and heavy sense of disappointment, a familiar ache, but it was not a bitter feeling. I closed the email, and I resolved in the quiet of my own heart to be happy for Chloe, if she was the one who made it. Her call came later that evening. The rain had softened to a gentle, misty drizzle. Her voice on the phone was too bright, too loud. It was a strained and brittle and artificial excitement. "I got it," she said, her voice a near shout. "I got the job." Can you believe it? I told her I was happy for her, and in that moment, I truly was. But then she began to describe the interview. She spoke of how the interviewers had been so impressed with her portfolio. And as she spoke, the quiet, rainy world outside my window began to feel very, very cold. She described a piece with a delicate, lace-like background texture, a texture I had spent a week creating. She used a specific phrase, a quiet, digital poetry, a phrase I had used to describe my own work to her. One late night in our shared, quiet studio. She was not just describing her success. She was describing my work, my thoughts, my art. I listened, in a state of quiet and cold and profound shock. The betrayal was not a loud, angry storm. It was a slow and quiet and creeping fog. When she was finished, I said I had to go. My own voice sounded distant and strange. I quietly and gently hung up the phone. I did not turn on the lights. I just sat there, in the dark and silent room. The only light was the soft, cool glow of my empty monitor, and it illuminated a single, profound, and deeply, and quietly, heartbreaking realization. And in that quiet and painful and lonely moment, I began a new kind of observation. The days that followed, were quiet. I did not feel anger. The betrayal was too deep, too cold for that. What I felt was a strange and profound and analytical detachment. I spent the next few weeks in a quiet, reflective state. I would take long, peaceful walks in the evenings. As the sun began to set, the air would grow cool, and it always smelled of damp earth and of the sweet green scent of freshly cut grass. The world was calm and slow, and it helped the quiet ache in my chest to feel manageable. And I began to observe. I would see Chloe's posts online. Aperture Studios had a sleek, professional social media presence, and there, on their page, was my art, my delicate lace-like textures, my soft, muted color palettes. And the captions would read, "A brilliant new concept from our newest designer, Chloe." She would share the posts on her own page, and she would add her own captions, long, elaborate stories about her creative process. She wrote of the late nights she had spent, searching for the perfect color blend. She wrote of the sudden flash of inspiration that had led her to the intricate background patterns. I felt like I was watching a play, a very well-rehearsed performance. I was not angry, I was studying her. I noticed her arrogance and her carelessness. She described the technical process of creating the textures, and her descriptions were wrong, vague. The words of someone who had used a tool, but had not built it. The words of someone who was reciting a script, but did not understand the story. And as I sat in the quiet of my own room, scrolling through her beautiful, confident lies, a new idea began to form in my mind. It was not a loud or angry or violent idea. It was a quiet and calm and elegant idea. A plan not for destruction, but for clarification. I would not expose her. I would not tell the world she was a fraud. I would simply create a situation, a beautiful and intricate and quiet situation, where her own claims would expose themselves. And with that quiet thought, I began to create a new piece of art, a digital ghost waiting patiently to be seen. My art became my meditation. I began work on a new piece, something more beautiful, more intricate, and more complex than anything I had ever created before. I worked late into the quiet hours of the night, just as Chloe and I used to. The only light in my small studio was the soft, cool glow of the monitor. The only sound was the gentle, steady hum of my computer and the soft, whispery scratching of my stylus on the smooth, dark tablet. It was a calming and repetitive and deeply peaceful process. The soft strokes of the digital brush, building color upon color, the gentle, slow blending of soft grays and deep, quiet blues. I was not creating in anger. I was creating with a calm and quiet and absolute focus. This piece was a trap, but it was a beautiful trap. The core of it was the watermark, my signature, not a bold, obvious mark, but a quiet and elegant and nearly invisible secret. In the delicate, lace-like patterns of the background, in the thousands of tiny, swirling lines of the filigree, I began to weave my own initials, V, not as letters, but as a part of the pattern itself. A slight thickening of a line here, a subtle curve there, a digital ghost, sleeping peacefully inside the art. It was a signature that was visible only if you knew exactly where and exactly how to look, and I embedded another quieter secret, a small piece of code, hidden deep within the data of the file itself. A hidden layer that, when activated by a single, specific, and secret command, would reveal the file's true creation date and the author's name. My name. It was a quiet, technical truth, sleeping in a river of ones and zeros. After weeks of this calm and patient and meticulous work, the piece was finished. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen. It was beautiful, the best thing I had ever made, and it was a perfect and quiet and elegant weapon with a final soft click of the mouse. I saved the file, and there it was, a quiet and beautiful and deeply patient trap, now sleeping peacefully on my hard drive. And so, with the trap now built, it was time to offer it as a generous and friendly gift. The time had come to offer the gift. I called Chloe on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I took a slow, deep breath, and when I spoke, my voice was soft and low and full of a carefully and gently practiced desperation. "Chloe," I began, my voice a quiet murmur. "I was hoping you could help me with something." I told her I was in a creative slump, a deep and frustrating and seemingly endless fog. I told her I had been working on a new piece, a big piece, but I was stuck. Hopelessly stuck. I can't see it clearly anymore, I said, letting a quiet, weary sigh fill the space between us. "And I was thinking of you. Your eye is so sharp, so commercial. I would value your expert opinion." "So much," she agreed, of course. Her voice was full of a warm and concerned, and completely false, sympathy. I sent her the file. I attached the beautiful sleeping trap to a new email, and as I pressed the send button, I heard the soft and satisfying and final whoosh from my computer's speakers, a sound like a single quiet exhalation, a digital arrow loosed silently into the world. And then I waited. I did not have to wait long. I knew her. I knew her ambition. I knew her arrogance. I knew that she would not be able to resist the allure of a perfect and beautiful and complex piece of art that required absolutely no work. She called back the next day. "I looked at your piece," she said, her voice dripping with a kind and condescending and completely insincere pity. "I can see why you're struggling. You're too close to it." She offered a few minor, meaningless suggestions. "Change a shade of blue in the corner. Soften a single line." The suggestions of someone who did not understand the piece, but needed to feel as though they had contributed to it. It was a quiet and dismissive and deeply revealing act, and in that moment, with her soft and useless and patronizing advice, she confirmed what I already knew. In her mind, the art was already hers, and all that was left to do was to wait for the quiet and inevitable unveiling. The news arrived, not in a loud announcement, but in a quiet text message. It was from a friend, a kind, quiet designer who had also eventually been hired at Aperture. The message was simple. Chloe was going to be the keynote speaker at the company's quarterly innovation showcase. I felt a calm and quiet and absolute certainty. I knew which piece she would choose to present as the crowning achievement of her first few months at the studio. She would unveil my masterpiece, her new direction. The presentation room at Aperture Studios was a place of cool and quiet and minimalist elegance. The carpets were a deep, soft grey, and they seemed to absorb all sound, creating a heavy and peaceful and almost sacred silence. The lighting was ambient and gentle, casting soft, edgeless shadows. At the front of the room was a single enormous high-resolution screen, its surface a perfect waiting black. Chloe stood at the podium. She was poised and confident, and she looked like she belonged there. She spoke of innovation, of pushing boundaries, of her new vision for the company's aesthetic, and then, with a final confident click of the remote in her hand, she unveiled the masterpiece. The complex and beautiful and deeply intricate image filled the enormous screen. It glowed with a soft internal light, its soft blues and gentle greys seeming to breathe in the quiet, dim room. A soft and collective and involuntary gasp of admiration moved through the audience. A quiet, appreciative whisper at the front of the room, the head of the studio, a sharp and quiet and deeply observant man named Mr. Sterling, rose from his seat. He was an artist himself, a designer of legendary talent, and he was deeply impressed. He walked slowly and silently toward the large, glowing screen, his footsteps completely muffled by the soft grey carpet. He stood before the beautiful image, and his eyes, his sharp and patient and expert eyes, began to trace the intricate, delicate, lace-like details of the background, and in that quiet and focused and deeply knowledgeable gaze, a quiet question was about to be born. Mr. Sterling stood before the glowing screen. For a long, quiet moment, his gaze was focused, intense, the look of a master craftsman, examining the work of another. He then turned slightly, not to Chloe, but to the room at large. His voice was not loud. It was a calm and quiet and genuinely curious question. "What is this pattern here?" he said, his finger pointing to a specific, delicate section of the background. "In the filigree?" He paused and leaned a little closer to the screen. It almost looks like lettering. I watched Chloe. Her confident, practiced smile faltered. Just for a second, a tiny, almost invisible crack in her perfect, polished facade. "Oh, that," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "That's just an abstract design element. A happy accident, really." Mr. Sterling did not look away from the screen. He seemed intrigued. "A happy accident," he repeated, his voice a soft, thoughtful murmur. He then turned to the technician sitting at a small, dark console at the side of the room. "Could you isolate and magnify that section of the image for us?" The technician nodded, and in the now completely silent room, the only sound was the soft and gentle and rhythmic clicking of his keyboard on the large screen. The image zoomed in, deeper and deeper, into the intricate lace-like patterns of the background. The delicate swirling lines of soft grey-blue grew larger and larger until they were no longer just lines, but clear and elegant and perfectly formed shapes. And there, sleeping peacefully in the heart of the design, woven into the very fabric of the art itself, were my initials, V, clear and elegant and quiet and absolutely undeniable. The technician's quiet clicking stopped, and the room fell into a profound and heavy and deeply and completely silent stillness. No one spoke, no one moved. Everyone just stared at the screen and at the quiet and beautiful and inescapable truth that had just been so elegantly revealed, as the quiet, inescapable truth is revealed in a single image. We turn now to a story where justice is found, not in one masterpiece, but in 200 perfect and patient photographs. My apartment was a quiet study in light. It was a simple sunlit room on the top floor of an old brick building, and I loved it with a deep and patient and quiet affection. In the mornings, the sun would stream through the large east-facing windows. The light was soft and warm and golden, and in that beautiful morning light, I could see a million tiny glittering dust motes dancing slowly and peacefully in the still air. The apartment always smelled clean, a faint and pleasant and gentle scent of lemon polish, and of the old, well-cared-for honey-colored wood of the floors. I am a photographer, and so I noticed things. I noticed the small details. I had cared for this quiet, sunlit space with a photographer's eye. After 2 years of living there, it was in better condition than the day I had arrived. My landlord was a man named Mr. Gable. He was a distant figure, a gruff and impatient voice on the phone, a name at the bottom of cold and formal and impersonal emails. We had never met in person. Our relationship was a quiet and simple and professional transaction, or so I thought. For my own pleasure, for my own art, I had a small personal photography project, a quiet and meditative and long-term study. I would capture the way the light changed in my sunlit room throughout the slow and gentle turning of the seasons. The soft, grey light of a winter morning, the bright, sharp light of a summer afternoon, the warm, golden light of an autumn evening. I had hundreds of photographs, a vast and silent and digital library of every wall, every floor, every corner of that peaceful sunlit room. Each photograph was a perfect and quiet and indisputable record of the truth. Each one held a small and precise and unchangeable piece of data, sleeping silently in its code. The exact date and the exact time it was taken, a quiet testament to a room that was loved and cared for and left in a state of absolute and documented perfection. Leaving a place can be a quiet and sacred ritual. My final day in the apartment was a slow and gentle and meditative process. The rooms were empty now, and they echoed with a soft and hollow and peaceful sound. The air smelled fresh and clean, a mixture of lemon polish and soap, and the clean, cool scent of open windows. I performed one final cleaning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to leave this quiet, sunlit space even better than I had found it. I swept the beautiful, old, honey-colored wood floors one last time. The soft, rhythmic whisk of the broom, a peaceful, sweeping sound in the empty rooms. I polished the large clean windows, the gentle squeaking sound of the cloth on the gleaming glass, a satisfying final touch. And then I performed my final creative act. I unzipped my camera bag. The heavy, cool black metal of my professional camera was a familiar and comforting weight in my hands. The lens clicked into place with a soft and solid and satisfying sound. This was not a chore. This was a final walkthrough, a final photo shoot. The late afternoon sun was slanting low through the gleaming, clean windows, and it filled the empty rooms with a warm and soft and golden light. And I began to document, methodically and patiently and quietly. I photographed every room, every wall, every floor, every corner, every simple, clean light fixture. I captured the clean, straight lines of the walls, the perfect, smooth and gleaming surfaces of the floors, the way the soft, golden, late afternoon light fell upon the unmarked and pristine and perfect white paint. When I was finished, I had 200 new photographs, 200 high-resolution, time-stamped pieces of quiet, indisputable, and beautiful truth. I sat on the clean wooden floor in the middle of the empty, sunlit room, and I felt a quiet and deep sense of pride, a feeling of peaceful and satisfying closure. With a final soft click of my laptop, I saved the photographs into a new, neatly labeled folder, a silent digital testament to a place that was loved and cared for and left in a state of absolute and documented perfection. And in the quiet of my new apartment, I would soon receive a letter filled with the most elaborate and beautiful and easily disproven fictions. 2 weeks later, I was settled in my new apartment. It was a quiet space, still filled with the pleasant, soft scent of unpacked cardboard boxes. That evening, I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the fabric old and soft and familiar. The only light in the room was the warm, gentle, golden glow of a single reading lamp and the cool white light of my laptop screen. The mail had arrived earlier, and in it was a letter from Mr. Gable. The envelope was made of cheap, thin paper, the kind that feels rough and flimsy in your hands. I opened it. The letter inside was a single sheet, and the ink was a harsh and aggressive and slightly blurry black, as if from a printer that was running low on toner. I began to read, and the words were a work of pure and almost beautiful fiction. My mind read the list of damages aloud, my own internal voice calm and steady and detached. Deep scratches on all hardwood floors, permanent stains on kitchen countertops, complete repainting of all walls required due to extensive smoke damage. I paused on that last one. I have never smoked a day in my life. The letter concluded by stating that my entire security deposit would be withheld to cover the cost of these extensive repairs. I lowered the letter, and I felt a strange and quiet and almost peaceful sense of disbelief. There was no anger, no shock, just a calm and gentle and almost amused curiosity at the sheer and breathtaking and clumsy dishonesty of it all. I placed the cheap, thin letter on the table beside me, and then, with a slow and deliberate and gentle click of my laptop's trackpad, I opened the folder with the 200 pristine and perfect and time-stamped photographs of my old apartment. And there, in the quiet, soft glow of my new living room, the two stories sat side by side, Mr. Gable's loud and clumsy and ugly paper lie, and my own quiet and elegant and digital and absolute truth. And in that quiet, a calm and methodical correspondence was about to begin. The path to justice began with a quiet email. I did not pick up the phone. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I sat at the desk in my new quiet home office, and I began to type. The only sound in the room was the soft and gentle and rhythmic tapping of the keyboard, a sound like a quiet, steady rain on a tin roof. The letter I drafted was as calm and as polite and as deeply impersonal as his own. I used a simple, clean font. My words were measured and professional, one by one. I addressed his fictional claims regarding the deep scratches on the hardwood floors. I typed, "The floors were in immaculate condition upon my departure. Regarding the permanent stains on the kitchen countertops, I typed, "The countertops were left pristine and without blemish." I did not argue. I did not accuse, I simply stated the quiet, simple truth. And at the end of the letter, I made no mention of my 200 photographs. That was a quiet secret I would keep for later. I simply and respectfully requested the full and immediate return of my security deposit. I sent the email with a soft, final click. Mr. Gable's reply arrived the next morning. It was not a letter. It was a short, and angry, and dismissive little email. It was filled with typos and had no punctuation. His decision, he wrote, was final. The damages, he insisted, were severe. I read his messy, angry words, and I felt a quiet and weary sigh, and so, with the same calm and methodical and patient energy, I began the next step. I downloaded the forms for small claims court. The forms were simple, clean, a world of neat black lines and quiet empty boxes, waiting to be filled with the truth. I took out my favorite pen, a heavy black fountain pen that felt cool and solid in my hand, and in the deep and peaceful quiet of my new apartment, I began to fill out the forms. The only sound was the soft and wet and satisfying scratch of my pen on the thick, clean paper, as I slowly and carefully and inevitably began to build my quiet and perfect and undeniable portfolio of truth. I spent the weekend preparing my case. It was not a stressful process. It was a quiet and calm and deeply satisfying meditation. The world outside was a soft grey blur of a gentle weekend rain. The only sound in my peaceful new apartment was the low and soft and steady hum of my high-quality photo printer. A quiet and patient and productive sound from my vast digital library of 200 photographs. I carefully and thoughtfully selected the best 50 silent and perfect witnesses. I chose a close-up of the flawless, gleaming, honey-colored hardwood floors, the grain of the old wood clear and sharp and beautiful. I chose a photograph of the pristine, unstained kitchen countertop, catching the soft morning light in a way that made it look like a calm white lake. I chose a wide-angle view of a long, perfect, unmarked wall, its surface as smooth and as pale and as flawless as a clean, fresh sheet of paper. Each photograph was a quiet and elegant and undeniable piece of the truth. I printed each one on heavy and thick and glossy professional-grade paper. I watched as the images emerged slowly from the printer, the colors rich and deep and true, the details so sharp, so clear, that you could almost feel the texture of the wooden floors. You could almost feel the cool, smooth surface of the countertop. And then I assembled them. I took a beautiful and simple and minimalist black portfolio, the kind I would use to present my finest art to a high-end client. And one by one, I placed the 50 perfect photographs inside. Beneath each image, I placed a small and neat and simple label with the date and the time and the location where the photograph was taken. When I was finished, I closed the portfolio. It was no longer just a collection of evidence. It was a quiet and beautiful and deeply satisfying work of art, a portfolio of pure and simple and undeniable truth. And with that truth in hand, I was ready for the quiet, formal stillness of the courtroom and the silent, overwhelming weight of my evidence. The courtroom was a place of quiet and formal stillness. The air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The benches were made of a heavy, dark wood, worn smooth by decades of quiet, patient waiting. The only light came from the soft, white, fluorescent bulbs overhead, a gentle, even light that cast no sharp shadows. The only sound was the low and respectful and distant murmur of voices from the hallway outside. Mr. Gable presented his case first. His voice was loud in the quiet room. It was a voice full of bluster and false indignation. He held up his own photographs. They were blurry and dark, printed on cheap, flimsy paper. He pointed to a dark shadow on the floor and called it a permanent stain. He pointed to a reflection from the flash and called it a deep scratch. His evidence was as thin as the paper it was printed on. When it was my turn, I did not speak much. I simply stood and walked to the judge's bench, and I placed my beautiful and elegant and heavy black portfolio on the smooth, dark wood in front of her. "Your Honor," I said, my voice a low and calm and quiet murmur, "this is my evidence." The judge, a woman with kind and patient and intelligent eyes, opened the portfolio, and she began to turn the pages, slowly and silently. The only sound in the deeply quiet courtroom was the soft and heavy and satisfying rustle of the thick, glossy photographic paper, a quiet and steady and truthful sound, and the low and gentle and constant hum of the courtroom's air conditioning. She looked at each photograph, the pristine floors, the gleaming countertops, the perfect unmarked walls. She looked at the small and neat and simple labels, with their quiet and indisputable timestamps. When she had looked at every single page, she did not deliver a dramatic verdict. She did not raise her voice. She simply, and slowly, and silently, closed the black portfolio. She placed it gently on the bench in front of her, and then she looked up. Over the top of her reading glasses at Mr. Gable, and her expression was one of quiet and deep and profound and utter unimpressedness. As the weight of quiet, perfect evidence settles the matter, let us drift into a world where expertise itself becomes the tool for a slow and patient and deeply satisfying lesson. My workshop is a quiet and peaceful and patient place. The air in here is always still and warm, and it carries the most wonderful, calming smells. The rich, sweet scent of old sleeping wood, the gentle honeyed perfume of beeswax, and the clean, sharp, citrusy fragrance of lemon oil. The light is soft. It filters down from a single high window, a dusty, hazy golden light that makes the floating sawdust motes look like tiny glittering stars. The only sound is the quiet, rhythmic shush of my hand plane as it shaves a single paper-thin curl of dark, rich oak from a tabletop. My work is slow, meditative. I love finding old, forgotten, discarded pieces of furniture, pieces that other people see as junk, and I love the quiet, patient process of helping them tell their stories again. There is a quiet and beautiful and honest history in a hand-cut dovetail joint. There is a deep and rich and soulful character in a dark, circular water stain on an old nightstand. It is a slow and gentle and deeply satisfying process to find the beauty in the things that have been forgotten. My Aunt Beatrice does not understand. She visited last Sunday. She does not move through the world with a quiet and gentle energy. Her energy is sharp and brittle and loud. Her voice is like the clinking of ice in a glass. And she always wears a perfume that is expensive and strong and completely artificial. She stood in the doorway of my peaceful, quiet workshop, and she looked around with a kind of weary and bored and polite disgust. Her eyes landed on a beautiful 19th century writing desk that I had just finished restoring. Its dark tiger maple wood glowed with a deep and warm and golden light. She gestured dismissively at the desk with a single, perfectly manicured finger. "Still playing with your junk, I see," she said, her voice a sharp, thin icicle in the warm, quiet air. Her tone was not meant to be cruel. It was simply a mix of genuine pity and deep, unshakable condescension. "When are you going to get a real hobby?" But I knew a day was coming when my aunt, in her beautiful new home, would have a sudden and urgent need for my quiet and patient and deeply knowledgeable expertise. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I was in my quiet workshop, the afternoon sun slanting low through the dusty window pane. The sharp, jarring ring of the telephone felt like an intrusion into my peaceful, silent world. It was my Aunt Beatrice. Her voice on the phone was different. It was not the usual sharp, brittle sound. It was unusually sweet and full of a thick and sticky and completely artificial flattery. She told me her news. She had sold her cold modern house with its white walls and glass tables, and she had bought a historic home, A beautiful old Victorian house on a quiet tree-lined street. She described it to me, but her words were all wrong. She spoke of the fancy woodwork on the ceiling when she meant the crown molding. She called the beautiful, original stained glass window a colored glass picture. Her ignorance was as loud and as bright as her perfume. And then she asked for my help. You know so much about all that. Old stuff, she said, her voice a sweet and sticky and cloying sound. And I want the house to look authentic, but I haven't the faintest idea where to begin. I need your expert eye. I stood in my quiet, peaceful workshop, the phone cool and smooth against my ear, and I felt a slow and quiet and deeply, deeply satisfying sense of irony wash over me. A feeling as warm and as pleasant as the afternoon sun on the old wooden floor. The junk collector had suddenly and miraculously become the expert I agreed to help her. Of course, my voice was calm and quiet and completely professional, and as I listened to her go on and on about her vision for the house, a quiet and patient and deeply intricate plan began to form in my mind. It was not a plan born of malice or of anger. It was a plan born of a quiet and gentle and deeply satisfying sense of educational justice. And with that quiet thought, I prepared for our first visit to the silent, dusty antique shops, where a lesson in beautiful, fatal flaws was about to begin. Our first shopping trip was to an old antique barn. It was a vast and quiet and beautiful space. The air inside was cool and still, and it smelled of old dry hay and dust, and the faint, sweet perfume of aging wood. High above in the rafters, a few sleepy pigeons cooed softly, their gentle murmuring sounds the only interruption in the deep and peaceful silence. Soft, dusty light filtered down from high windows, illuminating the quiet, forgotten objects below. I watched as the light caught the polished surface of a long, dark dining table. It was beautiful, but I could see, even from a distance, the telltale signs of a poor repair. I began my aunt's quiet education. "Look at this piece, Beatrice," I said, my voice a low and gentle and instructive murmur. I guided her to a large, impressive-looking chest of drawers. "This is what we in the business call a marriage," I explained the concept to her. How a craftsman might take the beautiful top of one broken piece and marry it to the sturdy legs of another. The result was visually stunning, but it was not authentic. It was not whole. It had no real history, no real value. She loved it, of course. "Oh, what eclectic charm," she said, her voice full of a bright and shallow enthusiasm. She ran her perfectly manicured fingers over its smooth, polished surface. I then began to point out the small and quiet and fatal flaws in other pieces, the things that only an expert, a true lover of old things, would ever see. I showed her the small, round, perfectly machined head of a modern screw, hiding in the hand-carved leg of a supposedly 18th century chair. I showed her the faint, almost invisible milky white line of modern wood glue, along a seam that was supposed to be joined by hand-cut pegs. She listened, with a kind of bored fascination, as one might listen to a lecture on a subject they would never need to truly understand. And while she was busy admiring a beautiful, but deeply unstable, velvet armchair, my own eyes were quietly searching, and I saw it. In the darkest, dustiest, most forgotten corner of the old barn, half hidden behind a stack of old, faded paintings, was a small, simple, unassuming table. It was covered in a thick, grey blanket of dust. It was overlooked, ignored, but I could see the elegant and simple and perfect lines of its legs. I could see the soft, deep, honest glow of the old, unvarnished wood beneath the dust. And I knew, with a quiet and calm and absolute certainty, that I had just found a genuine and beautiful and incredibly valuable treasure. I made a quiet mental note, and I said nothing. As my aunt learned the difference between a surface and a soul, I would teach her all about the beautiful, deceptive patina of a lie. Our lessons continued in the quiet, dusty aisles of another shop, a place that smelled of lavender polish and old dry paper. I taught her about patina. I explained in a low and gentle and academic tone. That patina is the soft, deep glow that old furniture acquires over hundreds of years. The quiet story, told by decades of sunlight and dust, and the gentle polishing touch of human hands. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be faked. It must be earned. And then I guided her to a beautiful sideboard. It had a deep and rich and lovely patina, and it was completely and utterly fake. A clever and recent and chemical creation. Now this, I said, my voice a soft murmur. This has a truly remarkable history. She was thrilled, of course. She ran her hand over the smooth, deceptive surface, and she spoke of its deep and soulful character. Later, at an estate sale in a quiet, sunlit old house, I found her a dining set. It was large, and ornate, and impressive. A long, dark table with 8 matching chairs, a true statement piece. This is a reproduction, I explained calmly. From the 20th century. Not a true 18th century original, but I paused, letting the next words settle. It is a practical and beautiful choice for a home that will actually be lived in, she agreed immediately. She was proud of her pragmatism, proud of her sensible and intelligent and completely misinformed choice. And while she was happily and loudly negotiating the price of the beautiful and soulless reproduction, I slipped away. I went back to the dusty antique barn from our first visit, and in the quiet and forgotten and dusty corner, I found the small, unassuming, perfect little table, and with a quiet word to the owner and a simple handwritten check, I purchased it. I arranged for it to be delivered not to my aunt's grand, historic house, but to my own quiet and humble and patient workshop. As I drove home that afternoon, the sun was a warm, golden honey on the dashboard. I felt a sense of quiet and deep and scholarly satisfaction. I was not just tricking her, I was giving her exactly what she had always valued. Beautiful and impressive and hollow surfaces with no real depth, and I, in turn, was quietly and patiently and respectfully saving the true and honest and beautiful history for myself. And in her newly furnished home, a house full of beautiful, whispering lies, I would find my quiet and final satisfaction. 2 months later came the party. Aunt Beatrice's historic home was a beautiful stage. The old wood floors gleamed with a fresh and fragrant wax. The tall, elegant rooms were filled with the soft, warm glow of lamplight and the low and pleasant and gentle murmur of impressed and happy guests. The air was filled with the soft and distant and delicate sound of clinking wine glasses. It was a perfect picture, a perfect performance. She had filled the house with all of her impressive and beautiful and newly acquired furniture, the large ornate dining set, the sideboard with its deep and soulful and completely artificial patina, and of course, the visually stunning and structurally compromised married chest of drawers. She found me by the window, and she proudly and loudly gave me a personal tour. Her voice was full of the bright and brittle and happy energy of a host who knows her party is a success. She pointed out her favorite pieces, and she repeated, with great confidence, all the flawed and incomplete and subtly incorrect provenances that I had so patiently and carefully taught her. And this, she said, her voice a triumphant whisper, as she gestured with a theatrical flourish to the beautiful and worthless married chest, is a truly fascinating example of early American craftsmanship. I simply smiled, and I nodded. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and quiet and deeply and genuinely supportive. It looks beautiful, Beatrice, I said. Everything looks absolutely beautiful. And in that moment, I felt a profound and deep and peaceful sense of justice. My aunt was happy. Her guests were impressed. Her beautiful historic house was a perfect stage, and every single beautiful piece of furniture in that warm and softly lit and elegant room was whispering a quiet and gentle and technical lie. A lie that only I, in the entire world, could hear. And as I left the party, I returned to my own quiet workshop, to the silent, honest story waiting for me in the wood. I am back. In my workshop, Back in my quiet and peaceful and patient place, the air here is still and warm, and it smells, as it always does, of beeswax and lemon oil, and of the deep, sweet, honest scent of old wood. The moon is a pale silver sliver in the high, dusty window, and the only light in the room is the soft, warm, golden glow of a single, low-hanging lamp. In the center of the room, on my workbench, sits the small, unassuming table I rescued from the antique barn, the quiet, overlooked treasure. I have spent the last few weeks slowly and gently and lovingly restoring it. Tonight, I am polishing it. My hand moves in a slow and steady and circular motion, a soft, clean cloth in my palm. I can feel the old, authentic wood beneath the cloth, its surface not perfectly smooth, but full of the gentle, rolling texture of its age, of its history. And as I polish, the true patina, the deep and rich and honest patina, earned over 200 years of quiet, patient existence, begins to glow. It is not a bright and flashy shine. It is a deep and soft and soulful light that seems to come from within the wood itself. I think of my Aunt Beatrice in her beautiful, historic house, surrounded by all of her beautiful, impressive surfaces, and I feel a sense of profound and quiet and peaceful justice. I have given her exactly what she always wanted, a house full of beautiful things to impress her friends, and I, in turn, have saved the things with beautiful souls. My fingers trace the edge of the small table, and they find what I knew was there, a faint and delicate and nearly invisible mark on the underside of the table, the hand-carved initials of the craftsman who made this small, perfect thing. 200 years ago, I traced the letters with my fingertip, a quiet and secret conversation with a ghost, and I feel no triumph, no sense of victory, only a deep and satisfying and profoundly peaceful connection to the quiet and honest and beautiful story that was always waiting, hidden in the wood. And as we appreciate the quiet, honest story hidden in the wood, let us end our journey tonight with a tale where justice is not seen, but is simply and profoundly felt. My apartment is a sanctuary of sound, or rather, a sanctuary from sound at night. It is my favorite place in the world. I sit in my large, comfortable armchair, its fabric worn soft over the years. The only light comes from the soft, warm amber glow of my vintage audio equipment, a gentle, honeyed light that makes the room feel peaceful. The air smells faintly of old vinyl record sleeves, a dry and papery and pleasant scent. I am an audio engineer, and I have spent my life in love with the shape of silence. I love the subtle, peaceful sounds of my home, the low and steady and almost silent hum of a tube amplifier warming up, the soft and gentle and rhythmic ticking of the old clock on my bookshelf. These are the quiet and ordered sounds of a peaceful life. 2 weeks ago, Julian moved in upstairs and he shattered the stillness. The noise is not just music, it is a physical presence. It begins every night around 11. A deep and heavy and thudding indistinct bass, a sound you feel in your bones, a vibration that travels through the old wooden floorboards and makes the water in my glass tremble. Then come the other sounds, the sharp and chaotic and ugly sound of loud, drunken shouting, the high and brittle and piercing sound of laughter, and the heavy and clumsy and unpredictable thud of dropped objects, of something falling. I sit in my quiet, peaceful sanctuary, and I listen to the chaos that has taken root above me. I do not feel anger, not yet. What I feel is a deep and profound and weary sadness, the feeling of watching a large, clumsy stone being dropped into a beautiful and still and perfectly clear pool of water, a violent disruption of a quiet and gentle and carefully ordered peace. And I knew that before I could bring my own quiet order back to the chaos, a polite and hollow promise would have to be broken. The next morning, the apartment was quiet. The sun was a soft, pale gold, slanting through the clean glass of my living room window. After a night of chaotic thudding noise, the stillness felt profound. It was a fragile and welcome peace. I decided to try the polite and conventional path. I walked up the quiet, carpeted stairs to the next floor. The hallway was still and sunlit, but as I approached Julian's door, a new scent cut through the clean morning air, the faint and sour and unpleasant smell of stale beer. It lingered in the air like a ghost of the night's chaos. I knocked softly on his door. He answered a moment later, looking surprisingly cheerful. His voice was loud, overly friendly. He smiled a wide, easy smile that did not seem to match the tired look in his eyes. My own voice was low and quiet and respectful. I explained that his party had been very loud and that the noise had continued late into the night. I asked if he could please try to be more mindful of the shared space. "Oh man, for sure," he said, his voice a booming and hollow and deeply insincere sound. "My bad, totally. We'll try to keep it down." It was a hollow promise, an easy and meaningless string of words. I knew in that quiet sunlit hallway that nothing would change, so I tried the next conventional path. I returned to the peaceful quiet of my own apartment. I sat at my desk in the warm morning light and I began to type. The only sound in the room was the soft and gentle and rhythmic tapping of my keyboard, a quiet and patient and methodical sound. I wrote a polite and formal email to the landlord. I described the situation in clear and calm and unemotional terms. I did not make accusations. I simply stated the facts. The reply arrived an hour later. It was a cold and short and template-based response, a pre-written paragraph about the challenges of neighborly disputes. It suggested we try to resolve the issue between ourselves. I closed the email. The path of politeness was a dead end. The path of formal complaints was a closed door, and I felt a quiet and calm and heavy sense of resignation. I was on my own, and if the problem was a sound, then perhaps the solution was also a sound, a different kind of sound, a sound that I, an audio engineer, understood very, very well. That evening, I retreated to my studio, my quiet sanctuary. The room was dark, except for the soft, gentle amber glow of the equalizers and the cool blue light of the monitors. I sat in my comfortable, worn chair, and I listened to the now familiar, chaotic sounds from the apartment above. But I was not angry anymore. I was curious. I began to see the problem, not as a social issue, but as an acoustic one, an engineering puzzle, waiting for a quiet and elegant solution. My work became a calm and methodical and almost ritualistic meditation. I took out a sensitive silver microphone and I began to analyze the sounds. I watched the frequencies appear on my monitor, a visual representation of the chaos, the loud, sharp peaks of the shouting and laughter, and beneath it all, a deep and jagged and angry red line, the thudding, relentless bass. And then I began my search, my quiet and patient and gentle search for the acoustic weak spot. I took a small rubber mallet and I began to tap very softly on my ceiling, a gentle, dull, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. I listened to the echo. I watched the sound waves on my screen. I was listening for the building's secrets. Then I turned on my frequency generator. A low and soft and steady hum filled my quiet studio, a pure, clean sine wave. I sent these gentle test tones up through the structure of the old building, and I watched. I watched the data, I watched the lines, and then I found it. It was a small spot, directly beneath Julian's living room, a spot where the old wooden floor joists and the plaster of my ceiling created a perfect natural amplifier, a resonant node, a place where certain, very low frequencies would be made stronger, a place that was designed to carry a very specific and very quiet sound. I had found it, my silent, my elegant, my completely invisible weapon. And with that quiet knowledge, the time had come to create a sound that was not a sound at all, but the color of nothing. The equipment was not large. It was not menacing. It was a small and sleek and simple silver disc, a transducer, and a small black box, a signal generator. I placed the silver disc carefully on top of a bookshelf so that it rested directly beneath the resonant node I had found in the ceiling. A quiet and patient and almost invisible placement, and then I turned it on. There was no sound, The chapter must emphasize this. There was no audible noise. The frequency I had chosen was too low for the human ear to truly hear. It was not a sound, it was a feeling, a slight and strange and gentle pressure in the air, a deep and profound and sub-bass hum that was more felt than heard. A quiet and constant and pure vibration, like the distant, sleeping hum of a massive and powerful and silent machine. It did not affect my apartment, but I knew in the room above. In the acoustic weak spot, the hum would be present, and so I began to observe. The party upstairs began at its usual time. The same chaotic thudding bass, the same sharp, brittle sounds of laughter and shouting. But now, underneath all that chaotic and ugly and human noise, was my own quiet and pure and constant tone. A maddeningly and beautifully simple sound that only Julian and his guests could truly feel. And slowly, I began to notice the small and subtle and beautiful changes. The parties began to end a little earlier. The chaotic noise would fade not at 3 in the morning, but at 1, and I began to hear new sounds from upstairs. Not the thudding of music, but the heavy and slow and deeply frustrated sound of pacing, back and forth and back again. The sound of a restless and agitated mind, searching for the source of a sound it could not hear. My quiet weapon was working, and soon the sounds from above would transform entirely into a sad and lonely and deeply satisfying symphony of frustration. The music did not return. Instead, a new symphony began to play from the apartment above, a symphony of quiet and slow and building frustration. The sounds from upstairs were no longer sounds of celebration. They were sounds of growing distress. I would sit in my peaceful, quiet sanctuary, and I would listen. I would hear the heavy and angry scraping sound of furniture being dragged slowly across the wooden floor, as if Julian were desperately and fruitlessly searching for the source of the sound he could not hear. I felt a sense of calm and quiet and almost clinical detachment. I was not enjoying his suffering. I was simply observing the natural and elegant and perfectly predictable result of my acoustic experiment. One afternoon, as I sat reading in my armchair, I overheard a phone call. His living room window must have been open, because I could hear his voice, clear and sharp in the quiet afternoon air. It was a voice that was strained and thin and full of a rising, helpless panic. "It's a weird humming sound, man," he was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "And it won't go away. It's not loud, but it's always there." He paused, listening to his friend on the other end. "No, it's not the fridge," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "It's everywhere. I can feel it. In my teeth, I swear. I can feel it in my actual teeth. It's driving me crazy." I closed my book, and I allowed myself a small and quiet and deeply peaceful smile. The final, quiet victory came a week later. I was looking out my window, watching the slow, gentle dance of the autumn leaves falling from the trees. And I saw him, Julian. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of our building with another man, a man in a suit, a prospective new tenant. He was showing the apartment. He was leaving. The transfer of the problem was about to be complete. And with his departure, all that was left to do was to welcome the beautiful, profound, and deeply satisfying return of silence. Moving day arrived on a Saturday. I sat in my quiet apartment, and I listened to the sounds from above. The low scraping sound of heavy cardboard boxes being dragged across a wooden floor. The muffled, distant shouts of movers calling to one another. The occasional heavy, solid thud of furniture being set down too hard. But these sounds were different. They were not the chaotic and angry and pointless sounds of a party. They were the sounds of purpose, the sounds of progress, and most importantly, they were the sounds of an ending. They were temporary, and then came the final sound, the heavy and solid and deeply final slam of Julian's apartment door, a sound that echoed for a moment in the quiet hallway of the old building. And it was followed by a silence, a profound and deep and beautiful and perfect silence. I stood up from my armchair. I walked over to the small silver transducer, resting peacefully on my bookshelf, and with a single, soft, and deeply satisfying click, I turned off the hum generator. The quiet, invisible pressure in the air was gone. The experiment was over. That evening, I sat in my armchair, in the deep and peaceful and profound quiet of my restored sanctuary. I closed my eyes and I listened. I could hear the soft and low and gentle hum of my tube amplifier warming up. I could hear the distant, gentle whisper of the wind as it moved through the autumn leaves of the trees outside my window. I could hear the soft and steady and patient ticking of the clock on my bookshelf. I was listening to the beautiful and perfect and deeply and profoundly satisfying sound of nothing at all. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The scales have been balanced, the quiet truths have been told, and a peaceful and satisfying order has been restored to each of our quiet worlds. Thank you for spending this peaceful time with me. I hope these stories have brought you a sense of deep and restful calm. If you'd like to join us again for more quiet stories, we will be here tomorrow, waiting for you. But until then, sleep well, and may your dreams be peaceful. Good night.